Schwartz, your host and chief nerd. Welcome to Salesforce. I struggled with this for years, ironically, as a sales and marketing consultant to the Fortune 500. Over time, I realized that there was a more effective, more authentic way to get clients by helping instead of selling, teaching instead of marketing, and connecting instead of networking. My mission is to help you learn the easy way instead of the way I learned it, by sharing my stories, by bringing on awesome guests to share their stories. And of course, as a software guy, I had to go and create the CRM I'd wished I'd had when I was struggling with more traditional systems. It does more of what us solo consultants need, help us nail our positioning, help us get more leads and conversations off our website, get more referrals, have more conversations, automates proposals all the way through to e-signature and more, and less of the bloat that comes with traditional CRMs. If you want to check it out, you can start a free trial at mimiran.com. That's MIMIRAN.com. And you can even just sign up for the free version, which helps you nail your positioning. And you can also find proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, and more. Once again, that's MIMIRAN.com. Now let's get to it. So today I'm super excited to have with me Will Russell, who in 2017 launched Russell Marketing. It's a digital agency specializing in launch marketing for e-commerce companies. And they've generated more than $20 million in revenue for hundreds of entrepreneurs. And Will's been featured on Forbes and Business Insider, Crain's New York, Startup Nation, and more. He also launched the Russell Gives Foundation, a family foundation that offers grants and mentorship to 501c3. I always have trouble saying that correctly. Partners working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he comes to us with a philosophy and sociology degree, which I definitely want to get into. And one of the things that stood out to me is Will is an introvert. He loves Susan Cain's book, Quiet, which if you haven't read as an introvert, you really need to read it. In fact, if you've got other introverts in your life, you should probably read it to understand them. And he's gone down this path where, despite being an introvert, he's been a successful entrepreneur. So Will, excited to have you on. Welcome to the show. What do you have in your glass or in your mug?
Thanks for having me. I've got a green tea, if that's okay. I'm not a big drinker, but I made sure I got my cup of green tea in advance of the call, so I'll keep myself hydrated.
Cheers to you for that. I love some green tea myself. I've got some Chateau Neuf de Pape from Domaine Fontevin. It's mostly Grenache with some Syrah Mourvedre in here. And since it's my show, if I want to have a glass of wine, I just have a glass of wine. So cheers, Will.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me, Ruben. Pleasure to be here.
So growing up, did you think that you would launch a digital marketing agency?
The conventional path of 9 to 5, kind of commuting. I used to see my dad wake up very early in the morning, commute to London, commute home in the evenings, wearing his suit. I knew that wasn't for me. So I knew very early on that wasn't for me. I didn't necessarily anticipate going the agency route. I actually used to do a lot of soccer coaching or football coaching, and I think during my teen years, that looked like a path I might take. But my story takes me to the US and San Francisco, et cetera, and I ended up getting into digital marketing, and so that was the path I took. But yeah, I think I always had a sense. I wasn't one for offices and managers and commutes, so I always had an inkling that I was going to take a slightly different path than many of my peers.
Okay. Now, did your dad seem to like his job?
He loves it. He loved it, but here's a good point, Ruben. So you talked a minute ago about Susan Cain's book, and if you have an introvert in your life, you should read it. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. My dad, big extrovert, loves talking to people, loves interacting, loves being active and out there. And I gave him the book a few years ago because I wanted him to read it to really understand things from my perspective. I'm a lot more of an introvert, like my mum. So my dad loved it, but again, that's a good difference, or kind of distinction to make between me and him. He was all about going out, talking to people, being surrounded, I suppose, by activity and vibrancy. I've always been a little bit quieter, shyer, reserved. So all for him dismissed people doing that 9 to 5 commute kind of thing, which is a very different world these days with COVID. But for me, I just knew it wasn't my cup of tea.
So it wasn't like you saw him be miserable and you wanted to avoid
No,
that. You just knew that he was cut from slightly different cloth despite being your dad.
absolutely, yeah.
All right. Now, what led you to get a degree in philosophy and sociology?
Well, I did both those kind of topics at school, high school or secondary school in the UK. This is kind of what I talk about. I assume it was the same here in the US. Maybe it's different now than it was when I was in school, but there's this trajectory, there's this path that I feel like your teachers, your parents put you on, and that path is you work hard at school, you go to university, you get a job in London. I lived near London at the time. You put on your suit, you put on your tie, you get on the train, and you go into London, the financial district, and do your job. That university part is part of the script. To me, at 17 or 18, there was no other option. It wasn't even a consideration. So I thought, well, what do I want to do? Or what do I enjoy doing? And I had a really great philosophy teacher at high school, and so I enjoyed philosophy. I enjoyed those kind of conversations. So I focused on that with, as you pointed out, a little bit of sociology in there. I like anthropology, that kind of thing. So I did a degree that I thought I would enjoy, rather than a degree for utility, I suppose, because at the time it was just, you're going to go to university, so what are you going to do when you're there? And I thought, well, I may as well do something that I enjoy. Given that at the time I didn't have a plan of action for what I was doing after university, so that's it. In hindsight, I mean, I'm not one for regrets, but would have been useful maybe to do something like business. But if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm not going to look back and regret anything.
So this wasn't part of some grand plan to understand buyer psychology or anything like that. It
Uh,
was just I like philosophy, so I should get a degree there.
yeah, 18-year-old Will, 17-year-old Will didn't have too many grand plans. Will now does, but back then, no, I didn't. Winging it, doing something I enjoy, and that was the path I took. And I do think there's an argument to be made for philosophy being a useful kind of education. You think a lot about logic and arguments and persuasion. So there's an argument to be made there, but no, it wasn't part of the grand plan.
But I do think there's something there, like you say, whether or not it was part of the grand plan, that if you are doing marketing, understanding how to persuade people is useful. And if you're running a business, understanding what's really important is useful. All things that hopefully you get some training in out of a philosophy degree that maybe you don't get in quite the same way with a different kind of degree.
Absolutely, I think it allows you, or kind of being surrounded by philosophy or in those classes every day, it makes you more objective, I think, and it gives you an appetite or an understanding of how to step back and look at problems for the problems they are and not from kind of your perspective. And so I think whether it's in business or life, I do think that is a very useful attribute or to kind of train yourself in or try and learn. You need to be objective and remove your own personal feelings from things, especially in business negotiations or sales. That objectivity is a really powerful tool. So I think that was very useful.
And that's not something that you talk about a lot on your website, right? Like it's just kind of a footnote in there somewhere.
The objectivity or the
Well, just
universe.
that you bring a different perspective because you have a philosophy degree.
Yeah, I guess I've never considered it as a powerful sales tactic. I do think it's interesting. We had a sales call today, and I do think the processes, the way I've created these systems, puts that front and center. That kind of objectivity, empathy, looking at things. I think I mean, you talk about it too. Providing value rather than selling, and we're all about that. So I think that the way I think about things, maybe that training of philosophy and objectivity, definitely comes through once someone gets on the phone with me or starts communicating with me. But yeah, perhaps on the website, you're absolutely right. I'm not pushing it hard.
Well, it's funny, right? Because the things that we just take for granted are often the things that other people are most impressed with or most interested in.
True.
And for you, it's just, well, I got to university and didn't know what to do. So right?
Mm-hmm.
But for somebody else, I think, especially because we are awash in a world of MBAs and sort of the commodification of business relationships and marketing and so on, having someone who can provide a different perspective and, to your point about objectivity, be able to listen and understand that there's another viewpoint, the buyer's viewpoint or their buyer's viewpoint, whatever it might be, as a fully formed, rational, quasi-rational human being versus just a bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It's complete commoditization, or I mean, the focus on data, while meaningful and useful, is extreme. And even in the sales process, we do look at how many calls have you got, how many proposals do you send, how many, etc., etc. But it is, as you point out, really important to remember that every one of those calls or every one of those leads, it's a different person with different feelings, different goals. So, there's an element of that kind of mathematics and logic, but also you're going to have a limit to your success if you treat everything the same as just like a single number, a single digit in your spreadsheet.
Right. I think people can also tell when they're being treated as a number and when they're being treated as a human being.
Right.
And I don't know whether you saw this, but one of the things that amazed me once I sort of figured out how to deal with my introversion was just like actually just treating people like people is such a different experience for a lot of folks who are used to being treated like a number by their vendors, that it gives you this enormous advantage. And it's just more fun just to like actually connect human to human rather than, how quickly can I get through this checklist of people I'm supposed to quote unquote talk to so that I can say I've made my calls.
Yeah, it's a balance. I mean, you talk about like get through my checklist. It's something I do. I used to try and do networking, and I'm terrible at networking. So I gave that up pretty quickly. But occasionally there'll still be an event that I feel committed and obligated to go to. I had an event I went to last night, and I was on my own. My wife couldn't make it to be there with me, so I didn't know anyone. I knew one person, but not too much. I mean, my goal at that event was, talk to three people. it was go talk to three people, and if I can have three good conversations, it wasn't a sales pitch, it was just a casual event. But if I can have three good conversations with three people, I can leave and I can walk away feeling okay. You did good, kind of thing.
And so did you have your three conversations?
I did, got through it very quickly, and was able to depart. I spent, I had a good conversation with the host there, which was great. Had a couple of other good conversations with people, and moved on. Left feeling like I'd done what I was comfortable with, and was there to support the host in her kind of event celebration. So I ticked all the boxes there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we all have to figure out kind of what we're comfortable with. And I know that for me, I sort of reframe networking into connecting, because I hate networking, but I actually, even as an introvert, maybe especially as an introvert, I like connecting with other people. And so once I decided I'm not going to go to collect business cards or leads or anything, I'm just going to go to try to connect with other human beings, I started having a lot more fun. And then I bring a different energy that gets reflected or sent back to me in a more positive way. And so I wouldn't say that quote unquote networking events are my favorite thing, but they're a lot more fun. I don't dread them the way I used to. And the ironic thing is they're much more useful from a business development perspective than when I would show up and think, oh gosh, I have to network and get some business cards and whatever. So speaking of being shy and not wanting to network,
I knew I wanted to do something a little different from the norm. And the first few years after college, I was doing the norm. I was working in San Francisco, a couple of different companies, commuting in every day. I never liked commuting, ever. And then the organization I worked for was relocating, and it was going to extend my commute by maybe another hour total both ways. And I just thought that was a no-go. I wasn't going to spend 3 hours of my day on San Francisco uni transportation. And that was kind of the trigger I'd done some freelancing and dabbled a bit in that, so I felt I could see a path forward, and I just felt that was the right time to go off on my own. So I quit my job, and did kind of pursue some more freelancing opportunities. I made sure I hit some early goals, and this was like a sustainable business. I could feed myself, and when I saw that, and I could continue to see the path forward, I transitioned and launched this agency business, and kind of went all in because I felt comfortable with what I saw. I think that's important for me. I'm very risk averse. So maybe that ties into introversion, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I have to feel very, very confident and have enough information at hand to make big decisions. And so once I've done this kind of test phase as a freelancer and I saw kind of the business opportunities, I felt confident that this was something that I could build and grow, and so I was able to kind of commit to it fully, and haven't had to rewrite my resume ever since.
Well, so as somebody who's risk averse and introverted, how did you get your first clients?
Yeah, I did a lot, you know. Early on, I, I, I had used to have these spreadsheets where I would track my time and my investment in all these different kind of business development paths. And at the end of the quarter and halfway through the year, I'd look back on, well, how much business did this bring me? How much time did I spend doing it? And that includes all sorts of things. It certainly included networking events, cold emails. I used to do a lot of free strategy phone calls with people, kind of like as a early value, which hopefully would move into a collaboration. And then none of that worked. But I also had, I was very fortunate in that the employer I was leaving was going through a little bit of a transition themselves, and they wanted to keep me on for 3 months as a contractor. So I was able to have, I think it was maybe 15 hours a week or something, working for my prior employer as a contractor. And those 3 months really helped me transition as well, and it made sure that I had some income while I was exploring all these other opportunities. The clients in general, I guess the best trigger for me, or the best tactic for me, was one-on-one relationships with other service providers. So early on, I tried to make a lot of connections with people who offered services in a similar space to me. So we do launches. So there's a lot of people in the videography space or photography space who work on product launches. A lot of people, a lot of platforms that support launches. And so my goal wasn't necessarily to be reaching out to a whole bunch of prospective clients or entrepreneurs, but instead to build these relationships with other vendors, other business providers, and have more of a kind of a referral, kind of word of mouth type element to it. And that worked really well. That got the ball rolling. And since then, a lot of it came down to word of mouth, doing good word of mouth. Something early on I really focused on, which I think you have a lot of educational content around, is that kind of the nature of the sales process, or kind of the script, the processing of the leads, the proposals, making sure that that is converting people, and kind of that process is tight. So I did a lot of that work early on, and by the time the kind of preliminary contract I had with my former employer was coming to an end, some of these other bits and pieces had started to spark into life, and so clients started coming in mostly through just recommendations from other service providers.
So you basically turned a set of people who worked with the same people you want to work with into your sales team.
Yeah, actually.
Or at least marketing team.
Yeah, and there's very little. Even now, we've been around for 5 years or so. If someone comes in from one of these partners, if a lead comes in from one of these partners referred, that's a game changer. It's such a vote of confidence that at this point, I don't even need to sell anything. I just need to have a conversation with the potential client and make sure they like me and this is what they need, and etc. etc. But the voucher of credibility that comes through a referral is phenomenal. So if anyone's in the boat of kind of trying to look for those first clients or improve, their business development processes, and they don't yet have this partnership network with other folks in a similar space, I'd highly recommend that approach because it's very personal. It's a one-on-one relationship. It allows you to have lots of decent conversations, deeper conversations, rather than kind of the high-level rubbish that introverts don't necessarily like talking about. And you got to vouch your credibility every time a potential lead comes through. So as long as you do good work, that network is only going to flow, improve, and deliver more and more work for you down the road.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure people are saying, gosh, yes, that would be great. I could see how that would be wonderful to have that network. How do you go about building it? How long should people expect it to take? How many conversations do you have to have? What details can you provide that might help somebody trying to follow in your footsteps?
Well, I think in terms of the number of conversations or kind of the effort that would have to go into getting these conversations and relationships in place is pretty lightweight in the grand scheme of things, because there's no reason why someone else who provides a service in this space would receive an email from you saying, hey, we likely have the same customers. Our customers are often looking for your services. Your customers are probably looking for our services. Can we have an introductory call and get to know each other? I mean, I don't recall off the top of my head, maybe there was, but I don't recall too many people ignoring me or rejecting that option, because everyone's generally looking to improve their network, improve business development opportunities. So the conversations were relatively straightforward, because you're there as well as to receive value, but you're there to give them value. And in the same way that those folks have sent us leads over the years, we've sent them plenty of leads over the years as well, because we have clients who need their services. So I think as long as you position it well and you're approaching the right people, the reception should generally be pretty good. And in terms of the timeline it might take to start seeing that relationship develop, I think it depends. I would say that there's the principle, 80-20 principle that you would see in life. Some of these relationships, people say, yeah, this sounds great, let's do it, and you never hear from them again.
Right.
Others start sending business your way pretty quickly. So I think from my standpoint, my goal was always to, once I've had that first phone conversation, to try and send someone to them, send them a lead as quickly as possible, so that they kind of see that I'm proactive and will be proactive in a relationship, and then see what happens. And so, as I say, some of them send pretty quickly, some of them don't. If you're lucky enough to try and partner with a much bigger company, then they're going to have a whole sales team who you might want to get to know, not just the one person you speak to, but others. So it's just, chipping away at that and making sure that you've given them everything they could possibly need to recommend you and refer you to their potential clients or clientele. Then it's a pretty straightforward and pretty fast process. So again, not always going to work out, but can certainly translate into leads and business very, very quickly.
Well, it's something that you touched on that I want to highlight a little bit more that I think is really important. And I talk about this a lot when you're talking to prospects, but I think it's the same thing if you're talking to potential partners. The nice thing about this is you don't have to brag about yourself and how awesome you are. You're talking to a colleague or a peer in the industry about stuff in the industry that you're both really passionate about. And so I think that's a much easier conversation than, oh, look at me, I'm so great. Look at all our services, we're awesome, right? If you have that passion and knowledge about the industry, that's going to come through in those conversations just in the normal ebb and flow. And you never have to really do any bragging or selling or whatever that's going to really turn off the relationship.
Those conversations, don't have as much of them now, but those conversations were oftentimes just conversations about the challenges of entrepreneurship and the goals and aspirations we have for our businesses. And that's a conversation that, I mean, anyone who's an entrepreneur is going to want to have and enjoy having, because that's their lifestyle they've chosen to take. So yeah, I mean, the conversation mostly is a general, interesting, useful conversation for both of you, and it all comes down to what you said at the start, like connection. as long as someone feels a connection and they trust you through that phone call and believe that you will do what you say you're going to do, there's no reason why they wouldn't trust you with their potential clients as well. So it's more just have a great conversation, connect with that person on a personal level, and if they like you, then they're going to send business your way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And especially when you're introverted, I spent years trying to impersonate a salesperson. And I worked with very successful companies with amazing sales teams. And I thought that's what I was supposed to do. And it was terrible. It was like if you had tried to follow your dad and put a suit on every day, you would kind of be able to go through the motions, but it just felt wrong. Versus I love having those conversations where we're just talking about the thing that we both care about. That's what we want to do anyway, right? That's what gives us energy, even as introverts. We're discussing something that we find really interesting with someone else who finds it really interesting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
No reason not to have those conversations. Now, since you launched this agency and you got things off the ground, you've continued to try to figure out how to sell more efficiently and more effectively. Tell me a little bit about some of the experiments you've been running.
Well, it's an interesting that the sales piece of it is certainly presented a lot of challenges for me. Not necessarily because I'm an introvert. I mean, truth be told, there was a period, we had a year where we had a business development director and he was responsible for sales, and I loved it. I loved not having to be that main salesperson. But to be honest, I don't find sales calls that challenging myself. I've done it so much now that I've come much more accustomed to it. But I think there are some really interesting challenges in sales around our industry in particular. Number one, around training. So anyone that we're not like a software product, we're not even a hardware product where there's a very specific set of FAQs or there's like a chart that someone can follow in a sales call. Every conversation, maybe it's partly like we spoke about a moment ago because we're more introverted and we like to have proper conversations. Every conversation is a little bit different. There is, I've got a script, but it's not really a script. It's a flow of conversation. And there's a lot of different ways it can go and a lot of different nuances to launch marketing that a general salesperson is going to have a long time trying to learn. So I found training a very challenging, or bringing on someone to take on that role, a particular challenge. And as I said, we had someone for a year. He ended up starting his own successful business. And so now it's me and another team member still back on those sales. And then the other interesting challenge I find with the sales piece of it is I really don't want a big team. So we're a team of 8, and we've been like that maybe for a year and a half or so now. And I specifically had my goal of 2021 was not to hire anyone, because I don't want it to just every time you get more business, hire more people, and then you just have more and more team, and it become. I mean, managing a big company is not something I want to be doing, personally. Imagine that as the company grows, more and more meetings, more and more phone calls. That's not what I want to be doing. So I have this core intention to keep the team small. However, in order to do that and have the business grow, we have to do something from a sales perspective to increase that revenue and increase the revenue per customer. So there's been a lot of exploration of trying to get creative with the kind of services you can offer, or taking the value that you think you can provide and slicing it and dicing it into all these different ways that will allow different people to find it valuable. And then secondly, allow you overall to increase the average revenue you're bringing in per customer. So we're always testing different things like that, trying to test different service offerings or leverage something a little bit differently. At the moment, for example, a lot of other folks in the space are doing training. So they're doing digital training, online training. That's not really something I'm super keen on doing. I don't think we have the team capacity to do that well. However, there's so much content and training and information that we have that's incredibly useful. So we've got a couple of new services that we're testing at the moment, which are kind of like launch light versions. So if someone wants to work with us or reaches out to us and can't necessarily work with us to have full collaboration and have the budget, we're trying to offer some various alternatives where there's more consulting, maybe training, minimal training, maybe some sort of community. I know you have a LinkedIn community, for example, something similar, where we can provide a lot of value and give people access to resources and content and education without requiring from them these big budgets for a launch. So from an experimental standpoint, my main focus at the moment is definitely this year and this coming year, how can we take our core services and increase the revenue per customer we're bringing in and decrease the volume of customers we're having, but give them all an even better experience. So that's really where my focus has been coming at the moment.
So basically more value so you can capture some more of that is pricing, but without necessarily increasing the volume.
Yeah, that's the goal. That's the goal. And it's so easy to just hire more people. That's such an easy solution. And frankly, it's been a tough year, the decision to not hire anyone else. And I have a whole big Excel spreadsheet which tries to do a good estimation of team bandwidth, so that we can stop bringing in projects, and I know that the team doesn't want to be overwhelmed. And it's been a real challenge to kind of turn the tap off and say no to so many people when I know, well, I could bring them in and have X thousand more dollars this month, and just hire someone else. But I feel like that's the easy way out for me. And the real challenge I want to solve is how we can keep a team of 8 in sub 10. I know there's a lot of studies out there around a smaller team, sub 10. How we can do that, but grow the business year over year and continue to push revenue and reward the team. So that's for me. It's a trick. It's a challenge. It continues to be my main focus from a business development and sales standpoint.
Well, I bet a lot of people listening are saying, gosh, a team of 8 is actually large, and it must be nice to feel very overwhelmed and not know what to do with that and have to turn a lot of business away. And I feel like, one, you must be doing a great job. And 2, you've got a strong foundation for your positioning, right? You don't try to do everyone's digital marketing. You're focused on launching. And so if somebody has a launch coming up, you're someone they want to talk to versus the 8 million other digital agencies that might also do launches and other stuff and so on. How do you think that has played into basically letting you turn away business?
That's a really important point. Even early on, I knew I was never going to be able to be all things to all people. And I knew that specializing and being narrow in our focus would mean you'd have to turn away business, especially early on, because if someone comes to you, and that's tough, because early on, someone comes to you and says, well, we need some help with SEO. I know SEO, or I did back then, well enough to help them.
Right.
So do I spend 10 hours a week doing SEO when that's not the core service I want the business to be about? That's a tough thing to turn down, but long term, I think it was absolutely the right decision. So now we have these conversations every day. Again, I had this conversation today. I'm crystal clear early on with potential clients that we don't do these other things. Other competitors in our space do videography, do photography, do PR. We don't do these things. And so I want to really focus in on, no, we do X, Y, and Z. And we think we're darn good at doing X, Y, and Z. And that's why we focus on X, Y, and Z. And we don't worry about the things we don't think we're great at. We focus on what we think we believe we can be the best at. That makes my life easier from a team management standpoint. It makes my life easier from a metrics and analysis standpoint. And it certainly results in not being the right fit for other projects and some clients. But at the same time, think long term, that's the benefit. If we can become the absolute best at a few certain things, I'd much rather be like that than try and be much more and be adequate at much more. And that ties very much to the type of marketing I wanted to do. We could be, we do a lot of e-commerce work. We have a lot of clients we launch and we continue working with them post-launch when they're setting up their Shopify store or whatnot. But I don't position us as that at all because there's a million other ad agencies who do Shopify advertising, a million other agencies, and I don't want to compete with that. So by focusing on launches, by focusing on this launch system we have, by focusing on product validation, we're able to really target the type of people that come to us and minimize the competition because there's only a handful of other really good launch agencies. So it makes life a lot easier. So we can bring in these prospective clients, help them launch. And if they've had a great relationship with us and a great experience with us, then a natural consequence will be continuing to work together down the road. But I certainly don't position ourselves like that because, again, I really want to keep focused.
Well, it kind of ties into what you were saying earlier, where you're building up this referral network. When you are the person for a specific part of the market, you're very referable, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, we're doing a launch, send them to Will. If you were trying to do everything, there wouldn't be any part of the partner's mind that you occupied, and they would be worried about you competing with them, right? If you were a general purpose agency, you'd compete with all the other general purpose agencies out there. And I think it would actually, this is something that's so hard for people to understand, but the more narrow you get, the more referrals you get.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, early on, I was getting a lot of referrals around services that I didn't necessarily want us to offer. But now every single person that comes to us is launching something. So we're known, that's what we're known for in our network and the wider field. And I think that's great. And I think what particularly useful about that is how translatable all the lessons are that you learn from one client to another. If we do all these different things for these different people, let's say we offer SEO and social media and photography, then you're going to have a project of photography and a project of SEO, and the learnings aren't really going to translate.
Right.
With all of our clients, we are moving them through the same system, the same service. And so things we learn from one client, we can immediately put into practice for others and just constantly improve this core system.
Right.
Which again benefits us and clients in the long run.
Well, it's like if you're getting a knee replaced, you want to go to the doctor who only does knees,
exactly.
Who's done 1,000 of them, not the general purpose doctor who knows a little bit about knees and elbows and whatever else. Right.
It applies to everything. And an easy mistake to make is, well, if I do all these things, I've got more chance of more business, but that might work for you in very early days, but you're never going to be able to be the best at all these different things. You have to focus at some point, and I think that early focus has proved a useful strategy for us.
Now, tell me about some of the other things that you've done as business development experiments. I know you hired a business development director. You did some other things to try to sort of get out of having to do all the sales yourself.
Well, there's a few things over time. Incentivization for other team members has been one, trying to share the business development and incentive opportunity, reward with other team members. So now we have one team member is responsible for a lot of our affiliate or referral type revenue relationships. I'm responsible for longer term business relationships, and then we have another team member, Valerie, who is responsible for a lot of the launch relationships. So spreading the workload, number one, I think has been useful. I try and think a lot around productization, because as a service provider, ultimately you're swapping hours for money, and that's how you're delivering a service. In exchange, you're getting paid for it, and that's nice and that's important and that's valuable. But that's limiting as well. And I think my end goal for me is to have a life that the ideal life, I suppose, the life I aspire to. And as much as I enjoy the challenge of work and working with different people, I certainly don't want to be working all the time. So my goal long term has to be, how do we productize service or options and start making revenue in a way that doesn't require as much time. So training is certainly one of those options. There's a process we have called validation, where we collect data points and do these market fit tests for different products. I think long term, it would be a really amazing opportunity to have some sort of software that takes all this data. We collect all this data manually in a spreadsheet right now. Maybe we have a few dozen or 60, 70 or something different projects where we have this data set for. A few years down the road, we will have hundreds and hundreds. And how cool would it be if we could create this software, this kind of app where people can plug in information about their product, about the price point, industry category, advertising platforms they want to use, stuff like that, and it can essentially do the math and do the process for them and spit out, potential likelihood of success or something like that. It's a big ask, because if it was possible, someone would have, like Google would have done this and not done Google Glasses, because they would have realized in advance. But I think there has to be something like that, something down the road for many service providers, if their goal is to reduce their business's reliance on them, and allow them to spend more time doing what they want to do every day. There has to be productization in their business development, and really trying to work out ways to take this one-on-one value and make it something more meaningful for a much wider group of people. Very early on, I tried some training stuff and failed at that early on. Maybe if I tried it again now with a bit more credibility, it would do better. But that was one of the first things I did. I just created a whole bunch of training content and tried to sell that training content, webinars and ebooks and so on, and I did very poorly with that. So that was a great lesson. Another thing I did this year, I'm actually just getting a book published, about to get a book published, so that will be a productization example, a revenue source. So all of these deal with different things at play that I'm trying to juggle with having a small team and limited bandwidth ultimately, and also always ultimately focused on my goal, which is to reduce the hours I work doing things that aren't exactly what I want to be doing, right? So if I want to spend a little less time on the business, a little more time on the foundation, if I want to spend, in the future, more time with my kids potentially versus working, or I used to be a soccer coach, like I told you, I'd love to get back into that. So if I can spend more time soccer coaching. So ultimately, my goal is to have more ownership in my time year over year. And a consequence of that goal is that I have to work out ways to grow the business and bring in revenue, but don't just lean on me being a one-on-one salesperson.
Sure. Now, this sounds like the philosopher.
You see a lot out there, especially back in 2016, 2017. There was a lot out there online about online training and how much money you can make through these ad funnels, and
Right.
funnels was growing huge, and I guess I kind of got sucked into that a little bit and thought only about, okay, if you create good content, then surely people are going to want it. And I was thinking, and I knew I had good marketing expertise, and I knew I had good knowledge, and I knew I had the technical expertise to set up these funnels and these journeys. What I didn't think as much about was what would be the objection to people making this purchase from me. And at the time, it was probably me, because who am I? Even now, I feel, I've got a business now, and we're more sustainable, and I have these foundations, and I'm publishing this book, but even so, who am I? And I think that credibility element is a massive, massive hurdle for people early on. And I didn't think enough about that. I didn't do enough to get past that. And I didn't think enough about I guess back to what we were talking about before. I didn't think enough about value, providing value to someone to help them make their decision to make that purchase. Instead, I'm assuming they make that decision and then I can give them all the value they want. But that buyer decision wasn't really something I thought. I guess in hindsight, that's what I'd point to. I'd point to people would have seen the content or seen me trying to sell the content and just thought, who's this guy? You know, why am I going to trust him? Why am I going to believe him? Why am I going to give him money? I just didn't do enough to get past that and didn't really, I guess, have the, even if I wanted to resolve that, at the time, I didn't have the credentials to support that. Now you can read off Business Insider and Forbes, and that's wonderful. And these are great statistics and great names that have been able to be featured by. So yeah, now maybe I could put that up there, but at the time, I didn't. So in hindsight, if someone was in those shoes, I think a big piece of it has to be, well, what is my credibility, and how can I go about getting that credibility in order to help someone make that buy?
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Now, once you sort of got the initial cohort of customers and referral network, were there other things that you did in terms of business development, or did you just keep running that playbook?
I would say, I think we've been running that playbook for a while. It hasn't, building new relationships like that hasn't been a top priority for me in the last couple of years, I would say, because we had such a good flow of leads and such a good level of referrals for the team and availability that we had. I will say this year's been a tough one for lots of agencies, lots of marketing agencies that you may not have heard or may have heard. A lot of these privacy changes coming in with regards to these marketing platforms, and that's made life very difficult. So this year I did for the first time actually start throwing a lot more paid advertising into the mix for our own sales and lead generation, and that's doing great. But other than that, my core, I guess it comes down to the core of I just want everyone we work with to really get something from the experience. Number one, even if, and in the product launch space, things suck sometimes, things fail. You know, that just happened. That's a consequence of trying to launch products, and that's horrible. It's a really horrible feeling, and that happens. And so my priority was there is to, even if a client has a product that doesn't deliver the results they wanted, can they walk away from this experience feeling value and feel like they're getting something? And so that's a big priority. And honestly, I feel like if that's a priority, then over time, that goodwill and the way that you treat people and the way that you try and give your best for them, I don't know, it's a ripple effect, isn't it? It's an intangible ecosystem that after a few years really does just take on a life of its own, and will support ongoing kind of prospect generation down the road. So back to the question, I mean, I would say we haven't really done all that much in the last couple of years to really pursue new business development opportunities. Year one, I did all sorts of things like from networking, cold calls, cold emails. I used to reach out to like, famous entrepreneurs and just try and kind of start conversations with them. All these things you read in books and see on YouTube, if we take, I did all of them. And the one that worked was this referral-based kind of relationship. And so that's what I stuck with. The first couple of years, I pushed that hard. And the last couple of years, I haven't had to. Rightly or wrongly, you know, maybe I should be. Maybe there should be other business development methods that I'm pursuing. But as of now, it's worked very well and continuing. And that goodwill just creates its own ripple effect, which is delivered nicely.
Well, I think it's always easy to say, oh gosh, if I add this one more thing to my plate, it's all going to be additive. But at some point, you just end up with too much stuff going on, and it starts diminishing the returns you get from the stuff that's already working. So I think it's great that you found something that worked. You did it very systematically, right? You had a spreadsheet, you were tracking everything. You found the stuff that didn't work. You found the thing that worked. You doubled down on that, which happened to be the thing that you could do naturally and you were good at anyway. And
maybe one or the other, right?
right, totally, right. Maybe there's someone else who wouldn't have succeeded that way, but you tried a bunch of things and you went with what worked, and you discarded the stuff that didn't work because you had something that was working, right? Instead of trying to make everything else work, you said, let's not do that. Let's just focus on what's working, which I think is great. And I think tell me if I'm summarizing this correctly, you had a clear position in the market, not just for your prospects, but also for these referral partners. So you stood out to both of those people, and then you made the connections with the referral partners, and you sent them referrals proactively, and then they sent you referrals, and then you did good work. Is that pretty much the story?
That's pretty much the story. Just be a good person, and there's lots of advice out there, and when you're first starting out or in the early years, it's overwhelming, and people can say things like, just be a good person, or whatever it is, and you can just discard that as like, well, how does that help me? But at the end of the day, I think it does come down to the simplicity of, be nice to people. If they like you, they're more likely to work with you and more likely to share with other people about you. Do good work and deliver what you're supposed to deliver. It doesn't always work out. There's going to be issues just that will come, and people will be disappointed, and etc. etc. But as I said, as long as, even if a client is disappointed, you do everything you can to make sure they walk away feeling some level of value and contentment with the relationship, then it's gonna just evolve and take on that kind of trajectory of its own, and the ripple effect, and people will keep coming to you for support. I think my biggest fear, it will be less about, is business development going to stop? If one of these channels stops performing, and more, how much the industry that I work in is changing with privacy issues, and just the general competitive nature of these advertising platforms now, and are we going to be able to adjust to it? I think we are. I see it as a nice opportunity to adjust and improve, but I think from an agency standpoint, from a launch marketing standpoint, there's a lot of challenges approaching that are outside of our direct control, and it's a real 2021 and 2022 is going to be a real turning point in online marketing, and some agencies, some service providers are going to be cut because they're not going to adapt, and some are going to adapt and find a new way forward. So for me, the business development piece, I think, is do good work, be a good person, do nice things. I always say, like, we like to try, and I was told years ago, if you can wow someone really quickly in your relationship, that goodwill is going to last a long time. So I say this to our team, and we started doing this thing this year. We just send out cards and we send books to some of our clients when they start working with us, because if they feel, that good connection, they feel that bond, they feel like you care, then all these pitfalls that are going to come, and they will come, are going to be much easier to get past with the client, because that wow at the get-go has been more useful. So yeah, business development I feel good about. Sales I feel good about, because like you talked about, Ruben, I just consider it a personal relationship. From my standpoint, the bigger challenge I'm looking to is adjusting with the industry.
Well, that's awesome. And Will, thank you so much. I think what's brilliant about your story is that it sort of finds the happy Goldilocks middle ground between the advice that's so generic, oh, just be a nice person, and a lot of the advice that's just too complicated for anyone to wrap their minds around, or let alone follow. And you've got a plan that's pretty specific, it's reasonable, and anyone who does good work and knows what they're doing, who they're helping, can go in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Did something in this episode or a past episode help you out? I'd love to hear about it. Send comments, questions, or ideas for future episodes to hello@salesfornerds.io. And of course, iTunes reviews are super helpful for getting the word out. So if you've got a few moments to put one of those up, I'd really appreciate it. If you got a friend who'd benefit from one of these episodes, send a link. If you got a friend who wouldn't benefit from one of the episodes, but you just haven't talked to in a while, this is a great excuse to pick up the phone and give them a call. Of course, if you're looking for a whole new take on CRM for solo consultants, along with proposal templates, lead magnet ideas, free positioning tools, and more, check it out at mimiran.com. That's MIMIRAN.com. Again, thanks for listening, and until next time.